Samuel Thornton woke to the smell of carbolic acid and the distant sound of voices. His head pounded like a blacksmith's hammer against an anvil, and his mouth felt like he'd swallowed a fistful of sand. He blinked slowly, his vision blurry, trying to make sense of where he was. White walls, a small window with thin curtains, a wooden chair in the corner, not his bedroom, not his ranch. He tried to sit up, but his body protested. Every muscle ached. His skin felt tight and burned. His lips cracked and painful. "Easy now," a woman's voice said. Doc Mills appeared beside the bed, her expression calm but watchful. She placed a hand on his shoulder, gently pressing him back down. "You've been through hell, Mr. Thornton. Best stay still a bit longer." "Thornton," his voice came out as a rasp. "You know who I am?" "Recognized you once we got your fever down," Doc Mills said, pouring water into a tin cup. "You own half the cattle in this territory. Hard to forget a face like yours, even sunburned half to death." Samuel took the cup with shaking hands and drank. The water was cool and clean, the best thing he'd tasted in days. "What happened?" "Near as I can tell, you wandered off into the desert and collapsed from heat stroke," Doc Mills said, crossing her arms. "You're lucky to be alive." Samuel closed his eyes, fragments of memory flickering back. He'd been riding alone, something he'd done too often lately, ever since Eleanor and Lily died in the fire 2 years ago. The grief had hollowed him out, turned him into a shell of the man he used to be. He'd stopped caring about the ranch, about the business, about anything. That morning he'd ridden out without telling anyone where he was going. No hat, no canteen, just him and a horse, wandering aimlessly under a punishing sun. At some point, the horse had spooked, a rattlesnake maybe, and thrown him. He'd hit the ground hard, and after that, everything went black. "How did I get here, Samuel?" Samuel asked. Doc Mills hesitated, then sat down in the chair beside the bed. "A girl brought you in. Couldn't have been more than 13 years old. Found you on the road, loaded you onto a vegetable cart, and dragged you all the way into town by herself." Samuel stared at her. "A child?" "A child," Doc Mills confirmed. "Skinny little thing, barefoot, covered in dust and sweat. She didn't know who you were, didn't ask for anything, just begged me to save your life." Samuel's throat tightened. "Where is she?" "Gone," Doc Mills said quietly. "She paid what she could, barely $1, and when I said it wasn't enough, she gave me this." The doctor reached into her pocket and pulled out a turquoise and silver bracelet, setting it gently on the bedside table. Samuel picked it up, turning it over in his hands. The silver was tarnished but real. The turquoise stones were small but genuine. It wasn't worth a fortune, but it was worth something. More importantly, it was clearly treasured. "She said it was her mother's," Doc Mills continued, "the only thing she had left. And she gave it up without a second thought." Samuel's chest felt tight. He looked down at the bracelet, his thumb brushing over the worn silver. "What's her name?" "Rosalie Harper. Folks call her Rose." "Where does she live?" Doc Mills frowned. "That's the hard part. She lives, or lived, with her uncle, Jebediah Cade. Man's a drunk and a bastard, if you'll pardon my language. Word around town is he threw her out last night for giving away his money." Samuel's jaw clenched. "Where is she now?" "No one knows." Samuel sat up despite the pain, his voice harder now. "Find her." Doc Mills raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Thornton, you can barely stand." "I don't care," Samuel interrupted. "That girl saved my life. She gave up everything she had for a stranger. I'm not letting her sleep in the dirt while I lay here in a clean bed." Doc Mills studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "I'll send word to your ranch. Your foreman's been looking for you." "Good," Samuel said. "Tell Thomas Webb to get here fast, and tell him to bring help. We're going to find that girl." In the scorching heat of the Arizona desert, a 13-year-old orphan girl found an old man collapsed and dying under the relentless sun. With nothing but a wooden cart and a heart too big for her small frame. She dragged him miles through the burning sand to save his life. She gave up every penny she had, and when that wasn't enough, she handed over the only thing she had left of her mother, a turquoise and silver bracelet. She had no idea he was one of the wealthiest ranchers in the territory, or that her single act of kindness would change not just her life, but an entire family's legacy forever. This is the story of how compassion in the desert heat became a flame that would never go out. The sun rose over Dust Creek like a predator, slow and merciless, casting long shadows across the cracked earth before swallowing them whole. By mid-morning, the heat would be unbearable. By noon, it would be dangerous. But Rosalie Harper was already awake, her bare feet pressing against the splintered wooden floor of the shack she called home. She was 13 years old, thin as a willow branch, with sun-darkened skin and brown eyes that had learned too early how to hide pain. Her dark hair was pulled back into a single braid that hung down her back, frayed at the ends. Her dress was faded calico, patched at the elbows and hem, 2 sizes too big because it had belonged to her mother. Her mother had been gone 3 years now. Fever took her one winter, slow and cruel, and left Rose with nothing but memories and a turquoise and silver bracelet that used to jingle softly on her mother's wrist. Rose wore it now, hidden beneath the sleeve of her dress, pressed against her skin like a secret. She lived with her uncle, Jebediah Cade, a man who wasn't related by blood, but had taken her in after her mother died, not out of kindness, but because he saw value in a child who could work. Jeb was a drinker, a gambler, and a man whose temper was as unpredictable as a rattlesnake in tall grass. He didn't hit her every day, just the days when the whiskey ran dry or the cards ran cold. Rose's job was simple: sell water and dried goods at the Saguaro trading post on the edge of town. Dust Creek was a crossroads, a place where travelers stopped to rest before pushing deeper into the desert or turning back toward civilization. The trading post saw cowboys, prospectors, drifters, and occasionally families heading west with hope still bright in their eyes. Rose would stand beneath a tattered canvas awning, her small wooden cart in front of her, filled with tin cups of well water, strips of jerky, and bundles of sage tied with twine. She sold what she could, saved what she had to, and every evening she brought the money back to Jeb. It was never enough. $2? Jeb had snarled the night before, his breath reeking of cheap whiskey. You expect me to believe that's all you made? It was a slow day, Rose said quietly, eyes on the floor. Folks didn't have much to spend. He grabbed her wrist, yanked her forward. You trying to skim off me, girl? No, sir. His grip tightened until her bones ached. You better not be. When he finally let go, she stumbled back, cradling her wrist. There would be bruises by morning. There always were. Now, as the sun climbed higher, Rose pushed her cart down the dusty path toward the trading post. The wheels squeaked with every rotation, the axle worn down and crooked. Her arms were sore, her shoulders tight, but she kept moving. She had to. The trading post was already stirring when she arrived. A few horses were tied to the hitching post outside. A man in a wide-brimmed hat sat on the porch cleaning his rifle. He didn't look at her. Most people didn't. Rose set up her cart in the same spot she always did, near the corner where the shade lasted longest. She arranged the tin cups, checked the water barrel, and laid out the jerky in neat rows. Then she stood, hands folded in front of her, and waited. An hour passed. A woman bought a cup of water and didn't leave a tip. A cowboy asked the price of jerky, scoffed, and walked away. A child stared at her with wide eyes until his mother pulled him along. By midday, Rose had made 60 cents. Her stomach growled. She hadn't eaten since yesterday. But she didn't touch the jerky. That was for selling, not for her. She wiped the sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand, adjusted the bracelet beneath her sleeve, and told herself the same thing she told herself every day. Just get through today. Tomorrow might be better. It never was. The afternoon heat pressed down on Dust Creek like a iron skillet, shimmering in waves that made the horizon dance and blur. Most folks had retreated indoors, seeking shade and stillness until the worst of it passed. The trading post had gone quiet. Even the flies seemed too tired to buzz. Rose packed up her cart earlier than usual. She'd made $1.30, not great, but enough to keep Jeb from flying into a rage, maybe. She gripped the handles of her cart and began the long walk back toward the shack on the outskirts of town. The road was little more than a dirt path, winding through scrub brush and scattered Joshua trees. Red Rock Canyon loomed in the distance, its rust-colored cliffs rising like the bones of some ancient giant. The air tasted like dust and creosote. Rose walked slowly, her feet kicking up small clouds with every step. The sun beat down on her neck and shoulders. She pulled her braid forward to shield her skin, but it didn't help much. Sweat trickled down her temples. Her mouth was dry, but she didn't drink from the water barrel on her cart. That water was measured. That water was money. She had been walking for maybe 20 minutes when she saw him. At first, she thought it was a pile of old clothes someone had dumped by the roadside. But as she got closer, the pile moved, just barely, a twitch of a hand, a shallow rise and fall of a chest. Rose stopped, her breath caught. It was a man, old, with silver hair and a weathered face burned red by the sun. He lay sprawled on his side, one arm stretched out toward the road as if he'd been trying to crawl. His hat was a few feet away, overturned in the dirt. His lips were cracked and bleeding, his eyes were closed. Rose looked around. The road was empty, no horses, no wagon tracks, no sign of anyone else. She knelt beside him, her cart forgotten. "Mister," she said softly, "can you hear me?" His eyelids fluttered but didn't open. His breathing was shallow, labored. She touched his shoulder gently, and his skin was burning hot, not just from the sun, but from something deeper. Heat stroke, maybe. Dehydration for sure. "Mister, wake up," she tried again, a little louder this time. Nothing. Rose sat back on her heels, her mind racing. She looked down the road toward town, then back the way she'd come. The shack was closer, but there was no help there. Jeb wouldn't lift a finger for a dying man unless there was money in it. The trading post was farther, but Doc Mills had an office near there. If she could get him that far, but how? The man was twice her size, maybe more. She was strong for her age, lean and wiry from years of hard work, but she wasn't strong enough to carry a full-grown man. Her eyes fell on the cart. It was small, rickety, built for hauling water and goods, not people. But it had wheels, and wheels could roll. Rose stood quickly, dragged the cart closer, and began pulling everything out: tin cups, jerky, the water barrel. She set it all in the dirt, her hands moving fast, her heart pounding. Then she positioned the cart beside the man and crouched down. "All right, mister," she muttered under her breath. "You gotta help me just a little." She slipped her hands under his shoulders and pulled. He was heavy, heavier than she'd expected. Her arms strained, her back ached, but she gritted her teeth and pulled harder. Inch by inch, she dragged him toward the cart. His boots scraped against the ground. His head lolled to one side. She repositioned herself, braced her legs, and heaved him up onto the wooden platform. He didn't fit perfectly. His legs hung off the back, one arm draped over the side, but it would have to do. Rose grabbed the handles, took a deep breath, and started pulling. The wheels groaned under the weight. The cart lurched forward, uneven and shaky, but it moved, and so did she. The road to town had never felt so long. Rose leaned into the handles of the cart, her shoulders burning with every step. The wheels caught on rocks and ruts, jerking the cart sideways. Twice, she nearly lost her grip. Twice, she had to stop, reposition her hands, and force herself to keep going. The sun hammered down without mercy. Sweat soaked through her dress, stinging her eyes. Her throat was raw and dry. but the water barrel sat somewhere back on the road, abandoned with the rest of her goods. She didn't have time to go back for it. The man groaned softly, his head rolling to the side. His breathing was still shallow, still wrong. Rose didn't know much about medicine, but she knew enough to recognize dying when she saw it. "Hold on," she whispered, though she didn't know if he could hear her. "Just hold on a little longer." Her arms shook. Her legs felt like they might buckle, but she didn't stop. A rider passed her on horseback, a man in a dusty coat with a rifle slung across his back. He slowed, glanced at her, then at the man in the cart. For a moment, Rose thought he might stop, thought he might help, but he clicked his tongue, spurred his horse forward, and rode on. Rose watched him disappear down the road, her jaw tight. She didn't curse, she didn't cry. She just turned back to the cart and kept pulling. By the time the buildings of Dust Creek came into view, her hands were blistered and bleeding. Her legs trembled with every step, but she didn't slow down. She couldn't. Doc Catherine Mills' office sat on the corner of Main Street, a small adobe building with a painted sign that read "Medical Services" in faded letters. Rose hauled the cart up to the door, her chest heaving, and shoved it open with her shoulder. "Help!" she shouted, her voice cracking. "Please, someone help!" Doc Mills appeared from the back room, a tall woman in her 40s with graying hair pinned up in a bun, and sharp, assessing eyes. She took one look at the man in the cart and immediately moved into action. "Get him inside," she said, already rolling up her sleeves. "Quickly now." Between the two of them, they managed to drag the man off the cart and onto the examination table. Doc Mills checked his pulse, lifted his eyelids, pressed her hand to his forehead. "Heat stroke," she muttered. "Severe dehydration. He's been out there a while." She looked at Rose. "Where'd you find him?" "Out past Red Rock Canyon," Rose said, still catching her breath. "On the side of the road." Doc Mills nodded, already moving to gather supplies. Water, cloths, medicine. "You did good getting him here. Another hour and he'd be dead." Rose stood back, her hands clasped in front of her, watching as the doctor worked. Her heart was still racing, her arms still ached, but she'd made it. He was alive. Then Doc Mills turned to her, her expression more serious. "I can stabilize him, but he needs real care. That means keeping him here overnight, maybe longer. I'll need payment up front." Rose's stomach dropped. "How much?" $5. $5. Rose reached into her pocket and pulled out the coins she'd made that day. $1.30. She held them out, her hand trembling slightly. Doc Mills looked at the coins, then at Rose. "That's not enough, child." "It's all I have," Rose said quietly. The doctor hesitated, her eyes softening. "I'm sorry, but—" "Wait," Rose interrupted. She reached up and pushed back her sleeve. The turquoise and silver bracelet gleamed in the lamplight, the only beautiful thing she owned, her mother's bracelet. The last piece of her she had left. Her fingers fumbled with the clasp. Her hands shook, but she unhooked it, held it out, and placed it gently on the table. "This is real silver," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "And the turquoise, it's genuine. My mama said it was worth something." Doc Mills stared at the bracelet, then at Rose. "Please," Rose said, "just save him." The sun was sinking low by the time Rose left Doc Mills' office, painting the desert sky in shades of burnt orange and deep purple. The temperature had finally started to drop, but Rose barely noticed. She walked slowly, her feet dragging through the dust, her right wrist bare and cold where the bracelet used to rest. She kept touching the empty space, her fingers searching for something that wasn't there anymore. Each time, the absence hit her like a fresh wound. That bracelet had been the only piece of her mother she could hold, could see, could feel. Now it was gone. But the man would live. Doc Mills had said so, and somehow that had to be enough. Rose turned down the narrow path that led away from town. toward the ramshackle structure she'd been calling home for 3 years. It wasn't much, a one-room shack with a leaning porch and a roof that leaked when it rained, but it was shelter. It was all she had. As she approached, she saw Jeb sitting on the porch steps, a bottle dangling from his hand. He looked up when he heard her footsteps, his eyes already narrowed with suspicion. "You're late," he said, his voice rough and slurred. "I'm sorry," Rose said quietly. "Something happened. I don't care what happened." Jeb stood, swaying slightly. "Where's my money?" Rose reached into her pocket and pulled out nothing. Her fingers closed on empty fabric. The coins she'd made. She'd given them all to Dr. Mills. Her heart sank. I had to." "You had to what?" Jeb stepped down from the porch, his shadow stretching long across the ground. "Where is my money?" "There was a man," Rose said quickly, the words tumbling out. "He was dying on the road. I brought him to Dr. Mills. I had to pay." "You what?" Jeb's voice rose, sharp and dangerous. "He would have died if I didn't." The slap came fast, cracking across her cheek and snapping her head to the side. Rose stumbled, her hand flying to her face. Her ear rang, her eyes watered. "You gave away my money?" Jeb roared. "To some stranger?" "He needed help," Rose said, her voice small but steady. "I don't give a damn what he needed." Jeb grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her skin. "You work for me. That money is mine. You got no right." "I'm sorry." "Sorry don't pay for whiskey. Sorry don't pay for food." He shoved her backward. She tripped over her own feet and fell hard onto the dirt, landing on her hip. Pain shot up her side. Jeb loomed over her, his face red with fury. "What else did you give them?" Rose didn't answer. She just looked down at her bare wrist. Jeb followed her gaze. His eyes widened, then darkened with rage. "Where's that bracelet?" "I gave it to the doctor," Rose whispered. "It was the only way." "That bracelet was silver," Jeb shouted. "Real silver and turquoise. Do you know what that was worth?" "It was my mama's," Rose said, her voice cracking. "It was mine to give." That was the wrong thing to say. Jeb's hand shot out and grabbed the front of her dress, hauling her to her feet. "Nothing in this house is yours," he snarled, his breath hot and sour in her face. "You live here because I let you. You eat because I feed you, and you just threw away the one thing worth a damn." He shoved her again, harder this time. She hit the side of the shack, her shoulder slamming against the rough wood. "Get out," Jeb said, his voice cold now, deadly calm. Rose stared at him. "What?" "You heard me." He pointed toward the road. "Get out of my house. I don't want to see your face again, but now." Rose stood frozen for a moment, her mind racing. Then slowly, she turned and started walking. She didn't look back. She didn't beg. She just walked. Behind her, the door slammed shut, and Rose was alone. Night fell fast in the desert, swallowing the last remnants of daylight like a hungry animal. The temperature dropped with it, the scorching heat giving way to a cold that bit through Rose's thin dress and settled into her bones. She walked until her legs gave out, then found herself at the edge of town near the old livery stable. It had been abandoned for years, the roof half caved in, the stalls empty except for rotting hay and the occasional rattlesnake looking for shelter. Rose slipped inside through a gap in the wooden slats. The air smelled of dust, decay, and old leather. Moonlight filtered through the holes in the roof, casting pale stripes across the dirt floor. She found a corner in the back, away from the wind, and sank down against the wall. Her whole body ached, her arms from pulling the cart, her face from Jeb's slap, her hip from hitting the ground. But worse than the physical pain was the hollow feeling in her chest, the kind that came from losing something you could never get back. She pulled her knees to her chest and wrapped her arms around them, trying to keep warm. Her right wrist felt naked without the bracelet. She kept reaching for it, forgetting it was gone, and each time the realization hit her all over again. Her mother had worn that bracelet every single day. Rose could still remember the sound it made, the soft jingle of silver and turquoise, when her mother brushed her hair, or stirred a pot, or reached down to take Rose's hand. "You keep this safe, Rosie," her mother had whispered on her deathbed, pressing the bracelet into Rose's palm. "It belonged to your grandmother, and her mother before that. It's the only valuable thing we got, but it's worth more than money. It's family. It's love. Don't ever forget that." Rose hadn't forgotten. She'd kept it close for 3 years, hidden beneath her sleeve, pressed against her skin like a promise. And now it was gone. But even as tears pricked her eyes, she didn't regret it, not for a second. That man, whoever he was, would have died out there in the desert. His family would never have known what happened to him. He would have been just another body the vultures picked clean, another unmarked grave in the unforgiving West. She had saved a life. That had to mean something. A coyote howled somewhere in the distance, long and mournful. Rose listened until the sound faded, then closed her eyes and tried to sleep. Sleep didn't come easy. The cold kept her awake, and so did the gnawing hunger in her belly. She hadn't eaten since yesterday morning, a piece of stale bread and some weak coffee. Her stomach cramped and twisted, but there was nothing to be done about it. Somewhere around midnight, she heard voices outside, men's voices, rough and slurred with drink. They were coming from the saloon down the street, stumbling home after a long night of cards and whiskey. Rose held her breath and stayed perfectly still. She had learned a long time ago that being invisible was the safest way to survive. The voices passed by without stopping, fading into the night. When silence returned, Rose finally allowed herself to relax, though only slightly. She thought about Doc Mills, wondered if the old man was still alive, if the doctor had managed to bring his fever down. She thought about Jeb, drunk and angry back at the shack, probably already forgetting she'd ever lived there. She thought about her mother and what she would say if she could see Rose now. Cold, hungry, homeless, and alone. But her mother had also taught her something else, something she'd said more times than Rose could count. "Do what's right, Rosie, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. That's what makes you different from the world." Rose touched her bare wrist one more time, then pulled her hand away and tucked it under her arm for warmth. She had done what was right, and tomorrow, if tomorrow came, she would figure out the rest. For now, she closed her eyes, listened to the wind whistle through the broken stable, and waited for morning. Samuel Thornton woke to the smell of carbolic acid and the distant sound of voices. His head pounded like a blacksmith's hammer against an anvil, and his mouth felt like he'd swallowed a fistful of sand. He blinked slowly, his vision blurry, trying to make sense of where he was. White walls, a small window with thin curtains, a wooden chair in the corner. Not his bedroom, not his ranch. He tried to sit up, but his body protested. Every muscle ached. His skin felt tight and burned, his lips cracked and painful. "Easy now," a woman's voice said. Doc Mills appeared beside the bed, her expression calm but watchful. She placed a hand on his shoulder, gently pressing him back down. "You've been through hell, Mr. Thornton. Best stay still a bit longer." "Thornton," his voice came out as a rasp. "You know who I am?" "Recognized you once we got your fever down," Doc Mills said, pouring water into a tin cup. "You own half the cattle in this territory. Hard to forget a face like yours, even sunburned half to death." Samuel took the cup with shaking hands and drank. The water was cool and clean, the best thing he'd tasted in days. "What happened?" "Near as I can tell, you wandered off into the desert and collapsed from heat stroke," Doc Mills said, crossing her arms. "You're lucky to be alive." Samuel closed his eyes, fragments of memory flickering back. He'd been riding alone, something he'd done too often lately, ever since Eleanor and Lily died in the fire 2 years ago. The grief had hollowed him out, turned him into a shell of the man he used to be. He'd stopped caring about the ranch, about the business, about anything. That morning he'd ridden out without telling anyone where he was going. No hat, no canteen, just him and a horse. wandering aimlessly under a punishing sun. At some point, the horse had spooked, a rattlesnake maybe, and thrown him. He'd hit the ground hard, and after that, everything went black. "How did I get here, Samuel?" Samuel asked. Doc Mills hesitated, then sat down in the chair beside the bed. "A girl brought you in. Couldn't have been more than 13 years old. Found you on the road, loaded you onto a vegetable cart, and dragged you all the way into town by herself." Samuel stared at her. "A child?" "A child," Doc Mills confirmed. "Skinny little thing, barefoot, covered in dust and sweat. She didn't know who you were. Didn't ask for anything. Just begged me to save your life." Samuel's throat tightened. "Where is she?" "Gone," Doc Mills said quietly. "She paid what she could, barely $1, and when I said it wasn't enough, she gave me this." The doctor reached into her pocket and pulled out a turquoise and silver bracelet, setting it gently on the bedside table. Samuel picked it up, turning it over in his hands. The silver was tarnished but real. The turquoise stones were small but genuine. It wasn't worth a fortune, but it was worth something. More importantly, it was clearly treasured. "She said it was her mother's," Doc Mills continued. "The only thing she had left. And she gave it up without a second thought." Samuel's chest felt tight. He looked down at the bracelet, his thumb brushing over the worn silver. "What's her name?" "Rosalie Harper. Folks call her Rose." "Where does she live?" Doc Mills frowned. "That's the hard part. She lives, or lived, with her uncle, Jebediah Cade. Man's a drunk and a bastard, if you'll pardon my language. Word around town is he threw her out last night for giving away his money." Samuel's jaw clenched. "Where is she now?" "No one knows." Samuel sat up despite the pain, his voice harder now. "Find her." Doc Mills raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Thornton, you can barely stand." "I don't care," Samuel interrupted. "That girl saved my life. She gave up everything she had for a stranger. I'm not letting her sleep in the dirt while I lay here in a clean bed." Doc Mills studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "I'll send word to your ranch. Your foreman's been looking for you." "Good," Samuel said. "Tell Thomas Webb to get here fast. And tell him to bring help. We're going to find that girl." Thomas Webb arrived within the hour, riding hard with 2 ranch hands trailing behind him. He was a broad-shouldered man in his 50s with a weathered face, a thick mustache, and eyes that missed nothing. He'd been Samuel's foreman for 20 years, and in the time since Eleanor and Lily had died, he'd watched his boss fade into a ghost. But the man sitting up in Doc Mills's office now, bandaged, sunburned, but alert, looked different. There was fire in his eyes again. "Boss," Thomas said, stepping into the room and removing his hat, "thank God you're alive. We've been searching since yesterday morning." "I'm fine, Thomas," Samuel said, waving him off. "But I need you to find someone for me. A girl, Rosalie Harper, goes by Rose, 13 years old, dark hair, thin, barefoot. She saved my life, and now she's out there somewhere with nowhere to go." Thomas nodded slowly. "I'll ask around." "Start with the livery stable," Doc Mills interjected. "It's abandoned, but it's the kind of place a kid with no home might hide." Thomas turned to the 2 ranch hands. "You heard the doctor. Go check it out. Be gentle. Don't spook her if she's there." The men nodded and left. Samuel stood, ignoring the dizziness that washed over him. Doc Mills moved to stop him, but he held up a hand. "I'm going with them." "Mr. Thornton, you need rest." "I have rested enough," Samuel said firmly. He picked up the turquoise bracelet from the bedside table and slipped it into his coat pocket. "That girl gave up everything for me. The least I can do is look her in the eye and say thank you." Thomas didn't argue. He simply offered Samuel his arm, and together they walked out into the morning sun. The abandoned livery stable sat at the edge of town, sagging and gray, half swallowed by weeds. The 2 ranch hands were already dismounting when Samuel and Thomas arrived. One of them gestured toward the gap in the wooden slats. "Someone's in there," he said quietly. "Saw movement." Samuel stepped forward, his boots crunching on the gravel. He moved slowly, carefully, and ducked through the opening. Inside, the stable was dim and cool, shafts of sunlight cutting through the holes in the roof. It smelled like old hay and dust, and there in the far corner, curled up against the wall with her knees pulled to her chest, was Rose. She looked up when she heard footsteps, her eyes wide and wary, like a wild animal ready to bolt. Her face was streaked with dirt, her dress torn at the shoulder, her feet black with grime. But it was her, no question. "Rosalie Harper?" Samuel said gently. She didn't answer. She just stared at him, her body tense. Samuel took a slow step forward, keeping his hands visible. "My name is Samuel Thornton. You saved my life yesterday." Rose's eyes flickered with recognition, but she still didn't speak. Samuel crouched down slowly, wincing at the stiffness in his legs. "I'm not here to hurt you. I'm not here to take anything from you. I'm here because I owe you everything." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the turquoise bracelet. The silver caught the light, and Rose's breath hitched. "Doc Mills told me what you did," Samuel said quietly. "You gave up your money. You gave up this." He held the bracelet out toward her. "You gave up the last piece of your mother to save a stranger." Rose's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't reach for it. "I can't take it back," she whispered. "I gave it away." "No," Samuel said. "You trusted it to someone who would keep it safe until you were ready to have it back." He leaned forward and gently placed the bracelet in her lap. "It's yours. It always was." Rose stared down at the bracelet, her hands trembling. Slowly, carefully, she picked it up and held it against her chest. "You don't have to stay here," Samuel said. "You don't have to sleep in the dirt. If you'll let me, I'd like to help you. Not because I pity you, but because you did something no one else would. And that means something." Rose looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. "Where would I go?" she whispered. Samuel smiled, just a little. "Home." 3 years passed like water through a canyon. Slow at first, then all at once. The Triple T Ranch stretched across the Arizona territory like a kingdom, thousands of acres of grazing land, bordered by red rock mesas and cottonwood-lined creeks. Cattle moved in great herds across the valley, and the ranch house stood proud on a hillside, its whitewashed walls gleaming in the desert sun. Rose stood on the front porch, older now, 16 and strong. Her dark hair was braided neatly down her back, and she wore a simple blue dress with sturdy boots, clothes she'd chosen herself. Around her wrist, the turquoise and silver bracelet caught the morning light, as it always did. She wasn't a servant at the ranch. Samuel had made that clear from the very beginning. She had her own room, her own space, and more importantly, her own voice. He'd enrolled her in school, hired tutors when the schoolhouse lessons weren't enough, and listened when she spoke, not as a charity case, but as someone whose thoughts mattered. Samuel had changed too. The grief that had turned him into a ghost began to lift, not all at once, but piece by piece. He smiled more. He rode out to check the herds again. He started attending town meetings, contributing to the community he'd once withdrawn from. But the most important change came on a spring morning when he called Rose into his study. The room smelled of leather and tobacco, lined with books and maps. Samuel sat behind his desk, Thomas Webb standing beside him. On the desk sat a set of architectural drawings. "Come here, Rose," Samuel said, gesturing to the papers. "I want to show you something." Rose approached, curious. The drawings showed a building, 2 stories, wide windows, a bell tower, surrounded by courtyards and gardens. "What is it?" she asked. "A school," Samuel said. "Not just any school. A place for girls who have nowhere else to go. Orphans, runaways, girls whose families can't care for them. A place where they can learn, grow, and become whatever they want to be." Rose stared at the drawings, her throat tight. I'm calling it the Lily Thornton School for Girls, Samuel continued, his voice softer now, after my daughter. But it wouldn't exist without you. Rose looked up at him, confused. Me? You reminded me what mattered, Samuel said. When I was lying in that desert ready to die, I'd given up. I didn't care about the ranch, the money, the legacy. I was just waiting for it to end. He paused, his eyes glistening. But you, a child with nothing, gave up everything to save a stranger. You showed me what courage looks like, what compassion looks like. He stood and walked around the desk, placing a hand on her shoulder. This school is my way of honoring that, of making sure no girl like you ever has to sleep in a stable again. Tears rolled down Rose's cheeks, but she didn't wipe them away. I want you to help run it, Samuel said, when it opens. You know what these girls need because you've been where they are. Will you do it? Rose nodded, unable to speak. The Lily Thornton School for Girls opened 6 months later, just outside Dust Creek. It wasn't the fanciest building in the territory, but it was solid, warm, and filled with light. Girls came from all over, some brought by lawmen, some by priests, some who simply wandered in on their own. Rose was there every day, teaching, listening, and making sure every girl knew she mattered. Years later, when people asked Samuel Thornton why a wealthy cattle baron had dedicated his fortune to helping forgotten children, he would tell them the same story. Once, when I had nothing left to live for, a girl with even less gave me everything she had, including the one piece of her mother she still carried. She didn't ask for anything in return, but I owed her the rest of my life. And in the quiet halls of that school, where laughter replaced loneliness and hope replaced hunger, the gift Rose gave that day in the desert heat kept giving, again and again and again. Rose never saw Jebediah Cade again. Some said he drank himself to death. Others said he drifted west and disappeared. She didn't go looking. Some things, once left behind, are best left buried. The bracelet never left her wrist.